Okay, so good morning. Today we're going to be discussing the minhag to recite L'David Hashem Oiri, Psalm 27, during this time of the year. We start saying L'David Oiri on Rosh Chodesh Elul. There's different customs if you start on the first day or the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul. And then we say it sometime through somewhere in Tishrei. Chabad minhag is to say it all the way through Hoshana Rabbah, but we do not say it on Shmini Atzeres. So the last day we say it is in Hoshana Rabbah. Other customs say it through Shmini Atzeres. Could even be there are some who say it through Simchas Torah. There are other customs who finish saying it on Yom Kippur. They don't say it after Yom Kippur except on Hoshana Rabbah. So there's different variations, but the gist of the custom is quite similar, that it's said at this Tkufas Hashanah at this time of the year. We say it after Shachris, and then we also say it in the evening. Some people say it after Mincha, some people say it after Ma'ariv. Again, different customs about that. But that's the minhag. Now, where does this minhag come from? And how did it spread or not spread? So, it's interesting, people may be surprised to know that this is a fairly late custom in terms of something that spread so widely throughout Ashkenazim and Sfardim, and pretty much, we'll see soon exceptions, but pretty much most communities in Klal Yisrael have this custom. So it might surprise you to hear how late this custom came to be. One of the resources I used in preparing this class is an article, or a number of different articles written by Rabbi Eliezer Brod. Eliezer Brod is he's a genius, and there's lots of stuff from him online, both in audio and in writing and in Hebrew and in English, and he's really an expert in tracing minhag and these type of things. So one of the things he writes is that there is a sefer called Shirei HaLeviim, the songs of the Levites, which is a very extensive work to record for every single day of the year what is an appropriate Tehillim, any minhagim that there are about Tehillims to be said at certain times of the year. Now, this sefer is printed somewhere between the years of Tov Lamed Zayin to Tov Mem Beis, that's 1677 to 1682, somewhere in those years, and there's no mention of the David Oiri there. So, being quite a comprehensive work, if it's not mentioned there, it seems quite clear that this minhag was not known of, at least not widely, in the late 17th century. The first mention of this minhag, and again, all the articles that talk about this, they all agree on this, that the very first time we find any published mention of this minhag is in a sefer called Shem Tov Katan. Shem Tov Katan is authored by a Rabbi Binyamin Beinish HaKohen, known as the Baal Shem Tov of Krachin. And I wasn't able to find a lot of information about this person, but it was a very popular sefer that was first printed the very first time in the year Tov Samach Vav, that's 1706, at the very beginning of the 18th century. And over there he writes as follows: you should know this great secret. Anybody who says this psalm from Rosh Chodesh Elul till after Simchas Torah, even if a great decree from heaven is inscribed on this person, he can annul the decree. I'll reference a story which I don't want to get too strongly into right now, but if you Google it, you'll find it, of one of the hostages, Sapir Cohen, I think her name is, who was said L'David Oiri last year for every day from Rosh Chodesh Elul till Simchas Torah, and then she was taken hostage, and she continued saying it and found a lot of encouragement and support in it about saying that I'm not afraid of my enemies, etc., etc. Okay, so here it says that the segula of saying this thing, this capital it could annul bad decrees. He annuls from upon himself all bad and evil decrees. And he goes, he leaves the court case innocent, zakai. This word, by the way, it's a word that I know. I've seen this word many times. Chazal use this word to say when somebody goes free in court. But when I was preparing this class, I have to translate it into English. So I started looking up what's this word dimus, and it's a word that has its Latin or whatever roots. But anyway, it's cognate with the English word demission, like to dismiss. It's the same. The dimus and dismiss have the same ancestor in Latin. It means to dismiss from court. Okay. Anyway. You have to be very, very careful to say this Psalm 27 every morning and evening, every single day, from until after Simchas Torah. Then he is guaranteed that he will have a good and sweet life, and he will lay to rest any types of prosecutors. Okay, now this Sefer, which you and I probably never heard of until we got to this class, Shem Tov Katan, was printed over 9 times, at least 9 times, just throughout the 18th century. So, and in those days, printing wasn't as easy as it is today. So clearly, this was a sefer that was very popular and had a very great influence. And Rabbi Brod's assumption is, his understanding is that this Rabbi Binyamin ben Shakayin is the one who actually. He's the one who either instituted or at the very least made this minhag become popular.
What year?
Again, the first time this sefer is printed is in the year 1706. Okay, it's printed again. We're not going to get into all the names of exactly which farm it's mentioned and what year they were printed in, but. There's one important quote which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but we'll mention it now, is the Chemdas Yomim, sometimes known as the Chemdas HaYomim, although the accurate name of the book is Chemdas Yomim, which is for the first time printed in 1731. So it's about 25 years after the first printing of the Shem Tov Katan. Now what it says in Chemdas Yomim is like this: Toimar b'tchila mizmorei teshuva. You should first say psalms of repentance. Tefillah l'David, Shema Hashem, that's Psalm 86. And etc. He has other ones. And I also had the custom to say Psalm 27, and also Ranun Tzadikim, that's 32. Because each of these psalms, Psalm 27 of Davidari and Psalm 32, mention the 13 attributes of 13 names, he says, Yud Gimel Shem Savai, he says the name of Hashem 13 times, which correspond to the 13 attributes of Rachman. By the way, the minhag of Tashlich, which by the way we'll get to perhaps later, that the minhag of Tashlich also has its roots anchored at least somewhat in the Chemdas Yomim. Certainly the Chabad practice, I think it's pretty common practice, is that we say this Psalm 32 at Tashlich, where the emphasis is on the 13 Yud Gimel Mitzarach, when we say psukim that correspond to the 13 Yud Gimel Mitzarach. Okay. The correct time to say Psalm 27, says the Chemdas Yomim, is early in the morning, at the time when you say Slichas. I didn't have a chance to check, but I would assume the Chemdas Yomim is of the school that was saying Slichas throughout the entire month of Elul, so that's when it's the appropriate time to say these Psalms. Now, some people attribute the minhag of saying L'Davidori and Elul to the Chemdas Yomim. The problem is, first of all, he doesn't just say L'Davidori, he says to say a whole list, which he says here of 86 and 32, and we only say L'David. Second of all, he doesn't say to say it twice a day, he says to say it once a day, and he doesn't say to say it in connection to Shacharis, he says to say it in together with Mincha. None of these are true with the Shem Tov Katan, and also in another book from the same author, Amtachas B'Yamin, where it's clear that it said after the Amidah of Shachris and in the evening, and then it said during the Elul, and that it's only this one, not any other ones. Now we're going to see why this is important. The Chemdas Yomim is a controversial sefer, and many people did not say it because they attributed it to the Chemdas Yomim. So we'll get back to that. But before we get there, let's talk about one of the reasons. Oh, I should mention also the Chidah. The Chidah has a sefer, when the name of this sefer is always struck me as strange, Sansan Liyoir. There's actually a contemporary Sephardi Rabbi Mazuz, who also has a sefer by the name of Sansan Liyoir. Anyway, And the Chidah says, I saw this minhag, and it's done in the city of Hebron. I saw that the Shliach Tzibur said this every day from Chodesh Elul until after Yom Kippur, and then again on Tishrei, on Hoshana Rabbah, so a little bit of a different variation. And he says, I like this so much, you should do it all year. And I believe that there are some Sephardim who follow the Chidah and say Psalm 27 every single day throughout the whole year. Okay, what are the reasons to say the David Oiri during this time of the year? So perhaps one of the most oft-quoted Sfarim that give a reason is the Matei Ephraim. Who is the Matei Ephraim? The Matei Ephraim was actually technically, he wasn't a big Rav or Pesach in that sense, he may be possibly even a lay person, but he was a big Talmud Chacham who wrote a lot. He lived in Brody, which was one of the biggest Jewish communities in Poland, and his dates are Yud Tes Kislev Tov Kuf Chaf Aleph, so December 1760 until 1820 Chav Daled Av, was just his yard site a few weeks ago, 1828. Now, he was also very wealthy, so he also had the resources to publish his Sfarim and distribute them well, so perhaps that helped to his Sfarim becoming very popular. But one of his Sfarim is called Matei Ephraim. By the way, we spoke about Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis at great length a few months ago in connection with the question of duchening every day. So we mentioned Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis' opinions about that. Anyway, so Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis has a sefer called Matei Ephraim. Matei Ephraim is a sefer all about halachas and minhagim for this time of the year, for Elul and Tishrei, halachas minhagim of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, etc. And we got to mention the Chabad connection. I think the reason he's famous in Chabad is because the Rebbe quoted the Matei Ephraim for one issue about Elul, which the Rebbe quoted probably thousands of times if you count all the letters on Sichas. Anybody guess? The idea of checking tefillin and mezuzahs in Elul comes from the Matei Ephraim. I mean, I don't think he made it up himself. He's probably quoting somewhere earlier, but he's the one who made it popular, and that's who the Rebbe references. Whenever the Rebbe spoke about checking tefillin and mezuzahs in Elul, it was always referenced to the Matei Ephraim. Anyway.
What does he say about it?
Sorry?
What does he say?
About checking tefillin and mezuzahs? Well, boy, are you lucky that I actually printed that page as well. Hold on.
He's for it.
He says,
He's for it.
Yeah, he says, Yesh anshe ma'isa, there are men of good deed, noyagin b'chodesh hazeh mefashmishim b'duktukei mitzvahs liyis boidek u'boichin tefillin u'mezuzah shalem, who want to search in the minutiae of their mitzvahs to make sure they're all good. They check the tefillin and mezuzahs in this month. Also for other mitzvahs. By the way, it's maybe a good time to mention that checking tefillin and mezuzahs doesn't only mean to give them to a sofer to check if there's anything wrong inside of them. It also means to check that they're in the mezuzahs are in the right place, the tefillin in the right place. Sometimes throughout the year, your tzuas on your head tefillin could stretch, and maybe your tefillin are too low, so it might be time to adjust the sizing of your tefillin. Make sure you're placing the hand tefillin in the right place. All of these things doesn't necessarily. It means it's a time to be extra paying attention to your fulfillment of mitzvahs in general. He says b'shar mitzvahs in general, and specifically to the mitzvahs of tefillin and mezuzah. And so the Rebbe often encouraged people to do this. The Rebbe in general had a thing of 12 months. The Rebbe would often tell people, when in response to certain questions, check your tefillin and mezuzahs if you haven't done so within the last 12 months. Anyway, okay. So in Matei Ephraim, he brings the minhag. He mentions the minhag of saying l'David Oiri, and so the way it's printed here, you can see here. This is a nice print. The top of the page is Matei Ephraim, and then on the bottom you have the Elef Lamata, which is his own. It's his own commentary to his own works. And in the actual sefer, he writes just the basics, and then he elaborates in the footnotes type of thing. So over there he writes, "V'yisoid ha-minhag." What's the reason for this minhag of saying l'David Oiri on this time of the year? Because at the beginning of the first verse of the Chasam, it says two things about Hashem. L'David Hashem Oiri, Hashem is my light, v'yishi and my salvation. So there's a medrash that says that Oiri b'Rosh Hashanah, v'yishi b'Yom Kippur. It's a little bit vague. Obviously, Medrash is often vague, and we'll see soon some Sfarim that elaborate further on these Medrashim, but the Medrash just says one thing: Hashem is my light on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem is my salvation on Yom Kippur. So there's a shaykhis to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, so we've got to say L'David Oiri on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. He doesn't explain why you say it till Shmini Atzeret, yet he doesn't say why you say it in Elul. Then he says, and now additionally, now he doesn't say this in the Medrash, this is Rabbi Ephraim Zalman's own edition, that it says, Ki Tzbeneni B'Sukkah, later on in the chapter it says that Hashem hides me or protects me in his sukkah, which, in the literal sense of the word, has nothing to do with this booth that we sit in on the Yom Tov of Sukkot. It means that Hashem protects me in his shade, in his hut, in his abode. In his abode, exactly, right? But, says Rabbi Ephraim Zalman, this could also be an allusion, a reference to Sukkot, and so that's why we say it throughout Sukkot. Of course, he hasn't yet sort of addressed why we start saying it a month before, but I guess Elul, Shloshim Yom, we're already getting into the mode. Okay, so that's the reason that Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis suggests. Now, this reason does not go uncontended, and I will quote to you two sources who are not very happy with the Shar Ephraim's reason. The first I'm going to quote is from the Shar HaKolel. Shar HaKolel is Rabbi Avram David Lavut, who wrote a sefer on the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. He is the great-grandfather of the Rebbe, and he starts off, he quotes what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, that you say L'David Oiri from Mishchedesh Elul until Shana Rabbah, and he says, Matei Ephraim, he says, Yitzbeneni B'Sukkah refers to Sukkos. Probably he saw so in some Medrash, because like Matei Ephraim is making up his own Medrash, like that seems a little bit unplausible to the Shar HaKolel. I don't know if that's true or not, but okay. And then he says that the truth is that this doesn't make any sense. This reason that the Matei Ephraim is saying that because the Medrash says that Oiri is Rosh Hashanah and Yishi is Yom Kippur, therefore you should say L'David Oiri. He says this reason is not enough. To call up Psukim shebetanach nimtzoim shenidrashim al Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim yikve'enu yikvu b'siddur lemer kolam izmerim pamayim b'chol yoyim. And would you say that any pasuk in Tanakh, that there's a medrash that associates that pasuk with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we should say all those psukim and all those chapters twice a day for the whole month from Elul and Tishrei? So it doesn't make sense that should be the reason. But he says, so then he quotes from the Siddur Reb Shabsi Rashkover, which is one of the Siddurim of the Arizal, where there he mentions, like we saw already earlier, that it says in Chemdas Yomim, but it also says this in the Siddur of Reb Shabsi Rashkover, that it mentions 13 times Hashem's name, corresponding to the 13 attributes of mercy. And we know already from, it says in different places, he quotes here from the Alter Rebbe L'Kutei Torah, that the 13 attributes of mercy are already applicable from the beginning of Elul, so that already makes sense. Why he's saying it from the beginning of Elul? Because from Elul till Yom Kippur, that's the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was on the mountain the third time, and that's when he achieved full Rachamim, so that's the reference of the 13 attributes of mercy, corresponding to the 13 names of Hashem, etc., etc. Then he goes on to say, he elaborates more on the connection between this capital and the Yud Gimel Midas Rachmim and other Midrash Chazal. We'll suffice it at quoting that for now. So, to summarize, Shar HaKolel is saying, I don't like this reason because the Medrash has Oiriv Yishuv Rosh Hashanah, because if that were the case, there would be many other psukim that are associated with this time of the year that we should say, but rather specifically because of the connection to Yud Gimel Midas Rachmim. He mentions here that it says here there's 148 words if you count it in a certain way, which corresponds to I forgot exactly what he says here. 1 second. The point is that he finds sort of Kabbalistic, these type of references in the capital, of which we'll see more of in a moment. The other sefer I wanted to quote was from the sefer Baruch She'amar. The sefer Baruch She'amar is a sefer written by Baruch Epstein, not a different one, the son of the Aruch HaShulchan, the author of the Torah Tmima. So he says, in addition to asking what the Shar HaKolel asks, he says, by the way, Oiri v'yishi is just 2 words of the capital, but if you look in the Medrash, the entire capital is connected to Kriyas Yamsuf. Oiri is connected to Hashem is my light, is Kriyas Yamsuf, because it says Vayoyer es halayla, Hashem brightened up the night. Yishi, because it says Hisyatzu es Yeshuas Hashem. Mimi Ira, because it says Al Tiro, Hashem is Chaya, is Ozi v'Zimnas Yah, etc., etc. He goes through the Medrash goes through the whole capital and associates it with Kriyas Yamsuf. Says Baruch Epstein, I don't understand. 2 words of the capital are connected to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and therefore you're saying it twice a day from Rosh Chodesh Elul all the way to Yeshana Rabbah. How much more so, a 40 Yorai, as Rabbi Ephraim would say, should we be saying this on Pesach, or at least on Shvish al Pesach, where the entire capital is connected to thing? And that's it. He doesn't have an answer to his question. Okay. What other reasons do we have? So there's a sefer by the name of Shar HaMelech. Shar HaMelech the author is Rabbi Mordechai Bereb Shmuel Av Besdin. He was the Rav of a city in Poland called Wilkacz, and in the Polish today it's called Wielkopolski or something like that. Again, a sefer that was first published in the year 1769, and it was published many, many times afterwards. Now, in this sefer, which I could only find quite an old print of, he writes, so first he has a whole story that he says that he would darshan, he would make a drasha every year in the time leading up to Rosh Hashanah. So what's the history? Why does he said, I one time made a commitment that I was going to do this drasha every year. What's the story? So it's a very, very long story with a lot of details, but the bottom line is that the local authorities had ordered a closing order on the shul. The shul had to be shut down. And for many months and for a long time they were all davening in some sort of side room, I think in the Rabbi shul, in the Nashim. And basically it came before Rosh Hashanah, and he was like, everybody's become complacent and nobody's doing anything about this. So he gave a fire and brimstone drasha telling people how this is such a terrible thing, that the shul is closed and we can't daven properly, etc., etc. And that inspired people to pull together money, which was then used as a bribe to bribe the authorities to allow them to reopen the shul. In those days, they weren't hiding the fact that they were bribing things. Okay. Then he says, the following year, I had a dream, and the malach told me, the person in the dream told me, does he say who the person was? I don't remember, that why are you not doing a drasha? Last year you did a drasha, why are you not doing a drasha? So I said to him, what do you mean? Last year we had an issue, the shul was closed, so I had to be more people to get more inspired and more motivated to act. But what needs to be done now? So he says, no, now it's just as important to motivate people to act. And he says, and as a result of this dream, he made a halata that he's always going to give a drasha in Elul. What was the vart that the whoever this was in the dream told him? He said, you're the chazan on Yom Kippur. How do you say the Nusach HaBracha on Yom Kippur says, "Ma'avir Ashmiseinu b'chol shana v'shana or kol shana v'shana"? Hashem wipes out our averos kol shana v'shana or b'chol shana v'shana. It's a little bit of a grammatical variation, which doesn't seem at face value to be so all that significant, and I'm not really sure how to translate the exact grammatical difference into English. But the point is that Ma'avir Ashmiseinu kol shana v'shana would mean that on an annual basis he wipes out our averos. Whereas if you have b'chol shana v'shana, it can also have the connotation of being more than once a year. That Hashem wipes out our sins every year, but not limited to an annual basis. It could be multiple times. And so, yeah, it is. I don't want to get too carried away with the grammatical stuff because it can be a little bit technical and boring. And he says to him, there's a mashal of a king who's coming. We all like mashal of the king in the field, so we have a different mashal of a king over here who's coming to the city to collect his taxes from the inhabitants of this city. But as soon as he's a little bit, within reach of the city, but far distant, so the first group of elders go out to greet him, and they make such a positive impression on him that he forgives them for a third of the tax. And then he comes a little bit closer, and another group comes out, and he forgives another third, and so until the third group comes out, and he forgives another third. So the bottom line is that the dream is telling him that there are 3 times in the year where Hashem is forgiving the tax, forgiving the Averis. And so don't wait till Rosh Hashanah. Already in Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, it's important that you give your drasha to the community to inspire them to do teshuvah. And so he says that's in fact what he used to do every year. Now, by the way, of course, this is also reminiscent of what we discussed a couple of weeks ago with the minhag of blowing shofar in Elul, and the Rebbe explains that the whole idea of confusing the Satan is that we're going to be so invested in our teshuvah process that we're already going to accomplish complete teshuvah and being inscribed in the book of life already before Rosh Hashanah in the month of Elul. So, of course, that also matches up with what he's saying over here. Anyway, in that context, he says a whole long drasha about what's the reason to say LeDavid Oiri at this time of the year. And he says a lot of Kabbalistic stuff. We'll just do a little taste of it. He says, Basi lahachzik v'shtei yadayim, I've come here to support with two hands the minhag shelo yazizim b'zeh parsha, not to move away from this psalm. Everybody knows that this psalm is connected to this time of the year because it says Lulei ha'emanti, Lulei ha'emanti. The word lulei spells out the word Elul, and the pasuk lulei. I saw this somewhere else, and this is in a similar idea shared by the Tzaddik HaKohen in his Sefer Pri Tzadik, that the Gemara in Brachas says that lulei hamanti is connected with David HaMelech, fear that perhaps he will sin and that will cause him to lose Hashem's grace. So that also associates with the theme of Elul. So the letters are Elul and the theme is Elul. And then he goes on to quote the same medrash that the Shar Ephraim said, Oiri is Rosh Hashanah, Yishi is Yom Kippur. What's the connection? He says, well, the world is created in Rosh Hashanah. What is the first thing Hashem says when he creates the world? Yehi, let there be. Hello? What's the first thing Hashem says when he creates the world? Let there be, no? Hello, Steve. What's the first thing Hashem said when he creates the world? Let there be light. Oiri, light. Rosh Hashanah, very good. Right? Then he says, Yishi, what's the connection between Yishi and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Well, he says, Yesha is the gematria 380, and 380 is the gematria of Hashem's name, which he has a whole long thing for a few lines here explaining how you get to Hashem's name, of the connection between the shil of the interconnection between the name Yud Kei Vav Kei and the name Aleph Daled Nun Yun come to 380. Again, the exact mathematics we're going to leave for now, and so 380 Yesha is 380. So Yishi is my salvation refers to Yom Kippur, and that's why the clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore in Yom Kippur, the white clothing, was the big day Yesha, etc., etc. And basically the point is that all of that's reciting this capital every day has the capacity to push away the mekatrigim, those who try to make you do averos, and those who try to make you not be successful in your judgment. And then he brings the Zohar. It goes on and on and on, and in connection to the Yom Ra, numerous gematrias and interesting things connected to the capital. And then he finishes off by saying, this parsha, meaning Psalm 27, should be very cherished by everybody. But Hashem, certainly to those who come in the side, in the secrets of Hashem, meaning those who want to do their customs according to Kabbalistic teachings. You should understand very well that which I do not want to write explicitly. I don't want to divulge too many secrets in this book right here. However, for those who truly understand, it need not be spelled out because you could intuit it. And then he finishes off by saying, connecting it back to what he was told in the dream, that the word Le David, he said, Lamed, how much was the gematria of Lamed? Is 30. 30 is 3 times 10. So he said, if you take the Lamed, which is 3 times 10, and you split it into 3 yuds, yud being 10, so 3 yuds, and then you take the word David and you attach 3 yuds to it, it becomes Hashem's name. You put 1 yud before the first daled, then you put the second 2 yuds underneath each of the 2 daleds. What happens to a daled when you put underneath a yud underneath it? It becomes a hey. So there, if you take the lamed and split it into 3 yuds, then David becomes Yud Kei Vav Kei, which those 3 yuds correspond to the 3 times of the year, the 3 times within Elul, that there is an opportunity for forgiving part of our Averis, with the whole mashal of the king coming to the city with the three delegations who convince the king to forgo on part of the tax. Okay, that's the take basically of this sefer called Shar HaMelech. You have also in the sefer Panim Yafis. Panim Yafis is the Haflar, Pinchas Halevi Horovitz. His dates are 1731 to 1805, so you can see how quickly, already less than 100 years later, the minhag of the saying L'David Oiri has become so widespread that everybody's already taking it for granted and trying to suggest reasons why we're saying L'David Oiri. And he brings a number of reasons and connecting it to Sukkos, for example, Mo'ez Chai, he says is connected to my entire life. My entire life is connected to Sukkos because that my life comes, the schus of the 7 mitzvahs, Soiva Sheva, the 7 mitzvahs that we do on Sukkos, give us life. The 7 mitzvahs are Sukkah, these are mentioned in the Gemara. Sukkah, 4 species, Aladminim, the carbon oilus, the carbon chagiga, the carbon shlamim, the arava, that's on Hoshana Rabbah, and Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations, to the 7 special mitzvahs associated with Sukkos, which is connected to Hashem Mo'ez Chayai. Again, those type of, and there's a number of these type of references said in the Sefer Panim Yofis, and that's his connections to. Then he finishes off. Let's read one shtickle from the Panim Yofis. He writes like this: on a straightforward level, I'm going to explain to you the words Erev Yishi. It says in Pirkei Avos that the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. What does it mean? The reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah. Yes, of course, there's schar, you get reward, but what's the ultimate reward is the mitzvah itself, the opportunity to connect to Hashem. And therefore, when you say that the one thing I ask of Hashem is to be able to sit in the house of Hashem all the days of my life, which it says in this capital, and so that is accomplished on Sukkot. So Rosh Hashanah Kippur, we ask Hashem to give us that connection, which we have on Sukkot by sitting in the Sukkah for 7 days. Shivti b'veis Hashem kol yimei chayei, my entire life referring to Sukkot, as he said before, etc., etc. Again, very nice references and allusions, and I'm sure there's more to unpack over here. I'm trying to give more of an overview and to get the sort of the gist of it. Now, there are a number of sources which were against saying the capital of David Oiri in Elul. In the Siddur of Rabbi Yaakov Emden it's not mentioned, in the Siddur of Shalah it's not mentioned. Those are 2 very prominent Siddurim. It's brought down that the Vilna Gaon did not say David Oiri in Elul. Aptach Chassidim don't say it in Elul, and Sanz Chassidim don't say it in Elul. Sanz is the father branch of Baba of Kloisenberg and others. I don't know, I can't say about all of them. I believe that in Babav they don't say L'David Oiri, but they say 18 chapters a day in Elul. We say 3 chapters a day. We think they say 18 chapters a day. Obviously they finish Tehillim a number of times that way, and they say 18 chapters a day throughout Elul instead of L'David Oiri. I don't know where I get that from, that it's instead of L'David Oiri. It could just be a random minhag, but that's the way it was once upon a time presented to me by a Babaver. So I don't know if that's accurate or not. Now, I mentioned already before that one of the reasons perhaps not to say L'David Oiri is because of its attribution to the Sefer Chemdes Yomim, which we'll get to. But I'll mention a couple of other interesting things first, of reasons not to say it. First of all, there is a Sefer, I told you already that the Tzanz Chassidim don't say it. That goes back to the first Tzanz Rav, Reb Chaim of Tzanz. Now his great-grandson, the Kloisenberger Rebbe of Leonardo Hospital fame, so he has a Tshuva Sefer, and over there he writes that I'm going to tell you why we don't say L'David Oiri. Now, in this class we don't shy from controversial stuff, right? So nowadays, very much since last year Simchas Torah, HaMechuna B'Laz, October 7th, it's become very popular for people to say Misha Berach for Tzahal, the hostages, etc. And probably won't surprise you that there's a spectrum, and the sort of more Haredi you are, the more they tend towards, we'll say Tehillim, we'll say, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, to choose existing texts that we have to daven rather than introducing our own new Misha Berachs, right? So, anyway, I don't know that we have to make a whole philosophical dispute about it. I think it could also be a little bit of a taste thing, where the more Hasidim and Haredi find it, we don't make anything new, and we just do what we have, and the perhaps more modern or Mizrahi or whatever will find more meaning in creating their own tefillahs. We don't need to get into here if any one of those two opinions is more right or wrong. But the reason I mentioned this is because I was in London last week in a popular shul called Reb Chunas. Reb Chunas is, first of all, Reb Chunas is a tzanza shul, so it wouldn't surprise me if at least some of the times they don't say the Davidari there, although it is also what's known as a minion factory, so anybody could come and go and do whatever they want. But they had this letter from the Shefach Chaim, from the Kloisenberger, hanging outside on the door, with some sections of it highlighted in yellow. And my hunch was, I didn't ask anybody, but my hunch was that it was there because it was addressing this question of whether or not people should say, because anybody could come there to Shtiblich, it's an open minyan, and people could come and they might have not find favor with people saying certain new tefillahs, which anyway, whatever the case is, that was just for fun. This is what it says over there. Why do we not say L'David Oiri? He says, nowadays, we've suffered so much. Our entire prayer is only external, meaning we don't really mean it, we're not really living with it, and therefore, we shouldn't be creating new minhagim. We should only say exactly what from the early Chassidim and the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal, etc., etc. Look at listen to this. The son of Moshe Leib of Sasav says, if my only sin would be that I say 100 brachas every day, that would be bad enough. Right? In other words, he's saying that my prayer is so worthless that it's bad enough that I say 100 brachas every day. That's my worst avera. That's an avera. So certainly, how could we possibly introduce new customs that are not anchored deeply in the Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim or in the Arizal, etc. And therefore, we don't say the David. Yes.
Maybe he means that just that kind of problem.
No. That's not what he means. Okay. Now, I mentioned before, Reb Eliezer.
We didn't invent this tefillah. I mean, it's
no, yeah. So the chiddush is, The chiddush here is not just that he's saying don't make any new tefillahs. He's saying even capital Chav Zayin, it's Tehillim, because Tehillim is a wonderful thing to say. But to introduce an official to make an official minhag that we're now going to say this every day, no, that's too, you can't, Ari doesn't agree. Okay, fine. You're entitled. But you like his hospital, so you can't dismiss him.
I like his hospital.
Yeah.
Who's this again?
The Kloisenberger Rebbe.
Oh, the one in...
Netanya.
Yeah.
You even have a daughter named for his hospital.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I have to go back to Rabbi Eliezer Brod's article on the topic, where he quotes a very interesting story. Reb Shimon of Zalichov once came to the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Leibush of Tzanz. That's one of the children of the Sanzerov, and he says, why are you people not saying L'David Oiri, which they didn't because they were following the Tzanz custom. However, in the Shinover was another son of the Tzanzer Rebbe, who, by the way, he did a lot of things different than his father, but we're not going to get into that now. He says, why, in Shinover they say it, so why are you not saying it? And without waiting for an answer, Reb Shimon Zelichover says, I'll tell you why. One time in the days of Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, there was a terrible decree that the Moshel, the ruler, as we like to say in the children's story, the wicked parrots, the ruler, he didn't have any children. And he asked the Jews to daven for him, and he told the Jews that if you need to daven for me to have children, and if your prayers don't work, I'm going to expel all the Jews from the city. And Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem comes, and he says that you will have a son within 12 months. And Baal Shem Tov told this story to his students, and he says you shouldn't think that this came easy to Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, that he was easily able to guarantee the parrots that he would have children. Because before he went to the parrots, he went to the Tzad HaKdusha, he went to the holy sources, And V'loi Paul, he was not able to get a guarantee from them that they would be able to give the parrots a child. Then he went to the forces of impurity and he says, you give a child to the parrots, and that also didn't work. Until he was able to accomplish this with the Sitra Achra himself. In other words, this Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem went to the very core root of all evil, and those forces of Tumah were able to provide a child to the parrots. Says the Baal Shem Tov, "Meint nicht as Rabbi Eliyahu hat bakriegen Schissen Puls de Nura, nor ma hat ihm gewollt, ma hat ihm gewollt ma'abed sein von alles Nefesh, Ruach und Neshama." As a punishment for having done this and gotten something from the Sitra Achra, he was going to be completely punished. His neshama would be completely lost in the next world. He wouldn't have anything, any place over there. But because he literally gave up his neshama, he was Meister Nefesh, he gave up his life, his spiritual life, for Yidden, that they shouldn't be expelled from this town. So instead of completely wiping him away from the world to come, instead of that, we were a little bit more lenient, and there's different. I should mention that there's a number of different variations of the story, but they're all pretty much the same gist. That they said that there's two prayers that this Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem instituted, that we're going to be mevatel, that we're going to that we're not going to say them, and that will be his punishment for having done this. What are the two tefillos that he was mevatel? It doesn't mean tefillos that he composed. It means tefillos that he took existing texts and said that we should say them. What are the two things that he said to say that we're going to be mevatel? One of them is L'David Hashem Oiri, and the other is Kegavna on Friday night. Now in Chabad, we do say both of these. We do say L'David Oiri during the month of Elul and Tishrei, and we also do say Kegavna on Friday night. But basically, so Reb Shimon Zalachava said that that's why. So he said it didn't work out exactly that those two tefillos were completely wiped out, but rather it's somewhat. So Rabbi Elimelech, the Rabbi Elimelech of the Zhensk, did not say Kegavna on Friday night. And by the way, I don't know if this is connected, but when Shabbos falls on Yom Tif or on Matzah Yom Tif, in Chabad we say Kegavna, but other Chassidim don't say Kegavna. They like coming up now in Tishrei, all the Yom Tov is Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, so they don't say Kegavna. We say Kegavna even then as well. And then he says, and the Apterov didn't say L'David Oiri. In other words, so that was the punishment. But Kapanim, we see from here that part of this story, whatever exactly you make of the story and the different versions of the story, is that we're attributing the idea of saying L'David Hashem Oiri to Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem. Who is this Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem? And so for the next page and a half, Rabbi Brod goes on to elaborate on that actually there's two Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shems, both at similar times. One is the Rav of the city of Chelm in Poland, who passes away in the year Shin Mem Gimel. Shin Mem Gimel is 1783. And the other one is Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem in the city of a different city. And where is he? He's he's a student of the Maharal of Prague, and he passes away in Shin Sadik Vav. That's 40 years later. Similar times, there's two people by the name of Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, and he says that often those two are confused because they have the same name and a similar name, and etc., etc. Which one of those two could be responsible for the minhag of the David Oiri? He goes on, Rabbi Brod, as he is very capable of, and he finishes off by saying it could be that it's actually a mistake and that it's neither of those, but it's supposed to be Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. So Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, Eliyahu Baal Shem, those sound very similar, and it's easy to imagine how that mistake could have crept up. Okay, fine. That's another version of the story, that some Chassidim don't say L'David Oiri based on this story, that there was a specific reason why the person who instituted the minhag was punished, that his takana of the David Oiri should not be well accepted. And now we have to go on to explaining a little bit about the Chemdas Yomim. Who is the Chemdas Yomim? What is the Chemdas Yomim? And why is it such a big deal? Now the truth is that till today, scholars can debate you know what? I think I neglected to mention before. I should mention this, something from Chabad Torah, very similar to what some of the things we said before, but I wanted to share anyway. This is from a Maimon from the Alter Rebbe in the year Tov Kuf Samech Gimel. That's 1803. where he says that Ika Kavanim B'Mizmor Zeh, the primary purpose of saying this capital in the month of Elul is Lahamtik HaGvuras HaKoshes, to sweeten up the difficult Gevura, justice, V'Adinim HaKoshim, and the difficult judgment which can be aroused in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and therefore we say Mimi Ira B'Kroiv Elamireim, that all the enemies who I'm not afraid of, but I'm trusting on Hashem, those are the enemies of the Mekatsugim, those who try to be accusatory against the Jewish people. Bezois Ani B'Teach, I'm trusting in Zois. Zois refers to Yom Kippur. Bezois Yavei Aaron Al HaKodesh, and Yom Kippur, Aaron HaKohen comes into the Holy of Holies with Bezois, so that's connection to Yom Kippur. Acha Sha'alti Lachzis B'Noim Alatz B'Neinu B'Sukkoi, again the connection to Sukkos, I believe. Makifim, or perhaps not the Makifim of Yom Kippur in this mimer. So again, very similar ideas to things that we've already said before in the names of other Sfarim. But I wanted to quote something from the Alter Rebbe. Okay, let's get back to the Chemdas Yomim question. So, till today, scholars are very busy debating who the Chemdas Yomim is, who wrote it, what was his purpose in writing it, and till today nobody could agree about it. But I'll give you a brief overview of the history of the Chemdas Yomim and its acceptance or lack thereof amongst the Jewish communities, specifically amongst Chassidim, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to touch upon the Chabad approach to the Sefer Chemdas Yomim. So, Chemdas Yomim is published without any name of an author. The person who sort of brought it to the Beis Hatfus was an individual, according to this article, by the name of Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi, who bought the manuscript from some anonymous person in the Upper Galilee, and anyway, he was busy with 2 years preparing it for print, and I even brought him a magnifying glass because this printout is very difficult to read, and he worked for 2 years very intensely to bring it to print. Now, this sefer right away became very, very popular. It's a sefer that goes through the entire cycle of the year and gives you minhagim and practices, all things to do very much based on the Kabbalah of the Arizal, and in general things to help a person be a better Oved Hashem, minhagim, things to keep in mind, things to study, etc. Now this was so popular that it was first published in the year Tov Tzadik Aleph. Tov Tzadik Aleph is 1731, so that's the first time it was printed, like I mentioned before. It was within the first 30 years, that means between the year 1730 and 1760, it was published no less than 7 times. So it became very popular. However, very soon after that, it became very unpopular, and for hundreds of years, it was never reprinted. So it was printed 7 times within 30 years, but after that, once word started to get out on the street that this sefer is not such a good one, it was never published again at all until very recently. And in other words, between the year 1763 or so, and for another 200 years, so until very, very recently, until within the lifetime of everybody in this room pretty much, it was never republished. So it went from being one of the most popular Sfarim ever to being completely deserted and abandoned. It's interesting, like even today, when I was preparing the class, I'm researching. So one article about the Chemdas Yomim, he says, thank you to my friend from Eretz Yisrael who managed to get me a copy of this piece. And so until recently now, with Eitzar Chochmah and hard drives and the internet, you could just find the Chemdas Yomim in 3 minutes. But for many years, it was very difficult to get your hands on a copy of the Chemdas Yomim. What's the problem with the Chemdas Yomim? So maybe the first clue will be that the first person who made a war against the Chemdas Yomim was, thank you, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was known, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was known as being a very fierce kanoi zealot against anything that had the slightest smell or any association of Sabbatianism, of Shabbasos, and relationship to Shabtai Tzvi's movement. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden basically accuses the entire Sefer of being written by Nasan HaAzosi, Nathan of Gaza. Nathan of Gaza is the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi, and he's the one who really pushed and made Shabtai Tzvi become popular amongst the whole Jewish world. Well, I'm saying the word prophet in the context of being like Rashi says, the word navi means to talk. Yeah, he was his mouthpiece. And nowadays, although there's still the scholars still can't agree on who the author of Chemdas Yomim is, but everybody agrees that it wasn't Nasan HaZasi, and I believe everybody agrees that there are things from Nasan HaZasi that made it into the Sefer. There's at least three piyutim, three prayers, poetic prayers authored by Nathan Al-Gaza that made it into the Chemdas Yomim. Maybe more as well. Again, I'm really not an expert. I haven't sort of done the actual research so much into the different which elements of Chemdas Yomim. But there's definitely Nasan HaZasi is found in Chemdas Yomim, but he's not the author. But Rabbi Yaakov Emden thought that he was the author. And anyway, so already from the times of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, there's a strong movement against the Sefer. But enter the Hasidic movement, and now we really start a fierce battle against anything to do with the Chemdas Yomim.
For the same reason?
We have here so he brings here some Hasidic sources that also attribute it to being from the Chemdas Yomim, but some of them are without reason. So, for example, he says here there's a letter from the Shomei Amunin that's published in the Journal of Kovitz Beisar and Yisrael, volume 117, where there he says concerning the Sefer Chemdas Yomim, the Sefer is Moli v'Godesh. There's tremendous stuff in there. So what should I do? The Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, the students of the Baal Shem Tov, the Shada Beinargo, who challenged it, who challenged its veracity, its the value of it, and we never see the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov quoting the Chemdas Yomim. And it's brought down in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that he said not to learn this Sefer, and even though it is quoted in the Holy Sefer Yisrael Sherish Aveda, that he says that when you want to start learning the inner aspects of the Torah, you should start from the Chemdas Yomim. Nevertheless, it could be that the author of the Yisrael Sherish Aveda did not yet know that the Baal Shem Tov and the Chassidim did not hold of this Sefer. Now in the Sefer Shivcha Baal Shem Tov he brings in the name of Rabbi Yoel Magid Mesharim that the Baal Shem Tov had a dream that one of his students had shmad, he had converted to Christianity, and the Baal Shem Tov was very concerned, and eventually he determined that all of his students were complete, nobody had chas v'shalom shmad, but that one of his talmidim had been learning at nighttime from the Sefer Chemdas Hayomim. Another story is brought here from Rabbi Lezer Rokach about Amsterdam. He's actually the very early ancestor of the Belzer Rebbes, and he says that he was once said the Baal Shem Tov said that there's going to come out a sefer that's going to, from the Talmidim of Shabtai Tzvi, that is going to populate the Tumah in the world, and then the Toldos bought the Sefer Chemdas Hayomim, and the Baal Shem Tov told him that that's the bad sefer, and he took a shmata and he wrapped it up and he put it under the table. Okay. He brings here that the Sar Shalom of Belz used to learn the Sefer Chemdas Yomim on the night of Nittel. So that was the time of impurity. Not only did he not learn Torah, he learned Chemdas Yomim to sort of further, Okay, now let's bring this back to L'David Oiri. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. But he brings here, let's go to L'David Oiri, then we'll summarize Chemdas Yomim stuff. He says here that concerning the practice of saying L'David Oiri in Elul, certainly where's he quoting this from? He's quoting this from the Sefer Lev Sameach HaChodosh. Not familiar with the Sefer, but it's a letter from Harav HaKodesh Mirajlo, who I'm also not familiar with. And over there he says, certainly that our holy Rabbi, the Chayza of Lublin, did not say L'David Oiri in the month of Elul, and that he had many Talmidim. There were also many Talmidim of the Yehudi, the Yid, the Pshischa, and the Zidot Shoiva. By the way, I once spoke to Rabbi Zalman Leibachstein, the Rav of Zidot Shoiva over here on Devan, and I asked him that Zidot Shoiva don't say L'David Oiri. How come in your shul they say L'David Oiri? So he said, because my father, that's the one who just passed away, he wanted very much to quote-unquote be normal. In other words, he wanted to fit into the standard Jewish practice that nowadays if you don't say L'David Oiri, that's a little bit of a red herring, and he didn't want to stick out. So they abandoned Zudetroiv Minhag to not say L'David Oiri. And he says that the reason why they didn't say L'David Oiri is because he heard from the Rebbe of Lublin that the custom of L'David Oiri comes from the Chemdas Yomim, and that's the reason not to say it. Now, the truth is that we already said that it was thought that the source was the Chemdas Yomim, but it's since been determined that actually the source is earlier. Not just earlier, that the Chemdas Yomim is not what made it popular, that it was the Rabbi Yamin Beinish who made it popular. And then he says, interesting, he says, if you look at, we already mentioned a moment ago that the Yisod Sheresh HaAveda, he was very into Chemdas Yomim because he hadn't heard of the allegations. So he says that in some of the new prints of the Yisod Sheresh HaAveda, where he says that you should learn Chemdas Yomim, they switched the words Chemdas Yomim into Ches Vav Hey, which looks a little bit similar, but it's an acronym for Chovas Halvavis instead of Chemdas Yomim, even though it's very clear that that's not what the Yisod Sheresh HaAveda meant, because he says it's a sefer that's laid out according to the order of the year, and obviously that's not the case. I'm going to read from you I already mentioned that the bottom line is that the hesitance to Chemdas Yomim by Chassidim, etc., laid the case to rest, and the sefer wasn't reprinted for hundreds of years. But I'll read for you a summary from Rabbi Avraham Yari's book. Avraham Yari is a contemporary scholar. He has his own theories about who the authors of Chemdas Yomim are, but he says like this: is there Sabbatianism in the book Chemdas Yomim? He says it depends what you mean by Sabbatianism. If you mean are there any Shabbatian theology in the book, such as canceling fast days, canceling mourning over the churban of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, or Tikkun Chatzos, so then not only is the Chemdas Yomim not Sabbatian at all, on the contrary, there are many things which emphasize the importance of those types of practice. However, if you mean, is there any reference to the movement, the movement of the redemption of Shabtai Tzvi, which he refers to as the movement of the Geula movement of 1666 to 1670, then certainly not only is there reference to it, but a lot of the purpose of the book was there as a response to that movement and to sort of really encourage people to, whether it was to become more religious or exactly, I didn't read the whole book, but he says certainly there are those elements there, and he goes on to say how there certainly are some songs that are with some piyutim authored by Nathan of Gaza that made it into the book, etc. We'll finish off with a brief overview of the Chabad approach to Chemdas Yomim. So, there is a letter from the Rebbe in response to somebody who was asking about starting, he said, he wanted to start learning Kabbalah. Should he start from the Chemdas Yomim? I don't know this for sure, but I wonder if the person who wrote this letter to the Rebbe got the idea from Yisod V'Sheresh HaAveda, where he says you should start from Chemdas Yomim. So the Rebbe says, it's well known concerning the Sefer Chemdas Yomim that there are different opinions about it, and since to date I have not found it brought in the Sfarim of the Chabad Rabbi of the Rebbe's predecessor, so therefore, why start from there? There's plenty of other good places to start from. The bottom line is that certainly in the Hasidus and Kabbalistic teachings of the Rebbe, we do not find any explicit quotations or references to the Chemdas Yomim. It is quoted one time by the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in Kuntres Achron, in the laws of Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, where he says, Kach Kosuv B'Chemdas Yomim. He has a quote there from the Chemdas Yomim. But perhaps it's more significant whether or not it's quoted in the context of Kabbalah than if it's quoted in the context of of halacha. Now, Lamaisa, this was something which was written about there's a Chabad rabbi and scholar who lives in Lakewood, I believe, by the name of Rabbi Nochem Greenwald, who's also a very big expert researcher, and he's done extensive research and writing about the Chabad, specifically about the Chabad attitude to the Chemdas Yomim. Basically, his bottom line is, we don't quote it, if not against it, certainly very ambivalent and don't want to be embracive of it. However, there are certain customs and things that made it into Chabad that do come from the Chemdas Yomim. However, he says there's two things to keep in mind. One is that often the things that we quote, and this is not only true of Chabad, this is true of other Chassidim also, that if there is, for example, the Sefer Mikdash Melech, which is a very prominent Sefer, which we do very much accept in Chabad. So if the Mikdash Melech quotes something from the Chemdas Yomim, so it's Amin, V'sich, and Tiru, but like that secondary source at least makes that specific quote from the Chemdas Yomim to be kosher enough for us to quote. So even though on some level we're quoting the Chemdas Yomim, but we're really going through the secondary source, and it's like that we rely on him, on the Mikdash Melech, to be reliable enough that he wouldn't have taken out any problematic pieces. He wouldn't have quoted any problematic pieces of the Chemdas Yomim. Another scenario is where you have something that does come from the Chemdas Yomim, but the Chemdas Yomim, for the most part, or a lot of the Chemdas Yomim, he's not really saying his own things. He's saying things that come from earlier. Now, there are many things that the Chemdas Yomim writes that for years and years we thought it was his own thing, and then, in recent years, somebody said, "Oh, you know what? I found this in an earlier source," and it's clear from the language that that's where the Chemdas Yomim was taking it from, and so. Being that that's the case, there's a lot of things that we say, we're doing this custom because which is the source is the Chemdas Yomim, but the truth is that the Chemdas Yomim is not the first source for it, and even if it's something that to date we don't know of another source for it, it's still very possible that there is another source for it, because that seems to be the case with most minhagim that eventually, in the Chemdas Yomim, or many of them, that eventually earlier sources are found through it. And I'll mention just a couple of minhagim that all of us are aware and all of us do, and that actually come from the Chemdas Yomim. And again, most of these we've since found earlier sources for them. The Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur that on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, before sunset, it's a good idea to go out of the city to a well of water. Why are we doing tashlich by the water? Because water represents chesed, and also the fish that are in the water represent the open eye, representing the open eye of Hashem. Right? So that's the language of the Alter Rebbe in the reason for Tashlich, and according to Rabbi Greenwald, that language comes from the Chemdas Yomim. Now, it's not saying that the Alter Rebbe quoted it from the Chemdas Yomim, but whoever the Alter Rebbe quoted it from the Chemdas Yomim. And also he points out that the exact text of the Hirotzin that we say after Tashlich also seems to be the innovation of the Chemdas Yomim. Moving on to later on in the month of Tishrei, there's other things also. There's quite a number of things from the month of Tishrei actually that we do that are connected to Chemdas Yomim. We'll just mention a couple of things. The reason that we don't wash Nagelwasser on Yom Kippur, it's brought in a letter from the Rebbe that on Yom Kippur, the reason we wash Nagelwasser is because your hands are impure. But on Yom Kippur, the forces of impurity are not so strong, so they can't really extend to your whole hand, just on your fingertips. So we just wash until our knuckles. And he says, and this is quoted from the Mikdash Melech, but again, the Mikdash Melech seems to get this from the Chemdas Yomim. But again, Rabbi Greenwald says that he has found these things earlier than the Chemdas Yomim as well. Yes?
The question on that I give it, does it after you kick for some people wash?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, good question. I don't know. And a couple of other Tishrei-related things are, I believe the idea, the Yehirotzen on the apple that we say might be also from the Chemdas Yomim. And finally, the minhag of doing, interesting, this is a good one, the minhag, Chabad minhag, and many Chassidim have this minhag, and even some non-Chassidim have the minhag, to do hakafis on the night of Shmini Atzeres. So he says, so here's an interesting mistake, because some people said, the source for this is in Kisvei Arizal. However, if you look in Kisvei Arizal, they're not talking about Shmini Atzeres. They're talking about Eretz Yisrael, where Shmini Atzeres is Simchas Torah. So they're saying the minhag to do hakafis on they're talking about the minhag of hakafis. This later minhag, that even outside of Eretz Yisrael, where you're doing the Simchas Torah on the second day, on the last day of what we call today Simchas Torah, but in addition to that, also do hakafis the night before on Shmini Atzeres. That seems to be indeed the source. Let me just see a second. So the source is from the Chemdas Yomim, and for example, this same Rabbi Avraham Yari in his book Told the Simchas Torah, where he traces all the the custom, very, very detailed analysis of the development of Simchas Torah, because of course in Chazal, in the Gemara, and the Mishnah, and there's no reference to celebrating Simchas Torah the way we do. So he has a whole book on that, which I actually read a lot of that book last year. So he says that the very first source for doing hakafas outside of Eretz Yisrael on the night of Shmini Atzeres come from the Chemdes Yamim. However, Rabbi Greenwald writes over here that he has found earlier source for it from the Tur Barekas, which comes from the Talmud of Rabbi Chaim Vital, so it's all going back to the school of the Arizal, and here, already earlier than the Chemdes Yamim, there is the minhag of doing hakafas on Shmini Atzeres. However, he says, from that Sefer Tur Barekas, it seems that the primary minhag is to do hakafas by day of Shmini Atzeres. Our minhag is to do only by night of Shmini Atzeres, which seems to be based on the Chemdes Yamim. I should point out, Rabbi Greenwald doesn't say this, and I don't know if there's any connection between this and everything we've been talking about, but it's interesting to know that Sanzach Chassidim, who didn't say the David Oiri, seems in part maybe connected to the fact that it comes from the Chemdes Yamim, they do hakafas on Shmini Atzeres by night and by day. So I don't know if that's sort of to emphasize that we're not doing Chemdes Yamim, or if it's some combination of the Chemdes Yamim and the Tur Barekas, or some other reason. I haven't fully researched that, but that brings to a close to today's class. And of course, the most important part is that we should say L'David Oiri, and we should think about its meaning, and we should take it to heart. And Achash Shalti Meis Hashem Meis Avakish, etc., and all the very powerful psukim in the David Oiri should inspire us and motivate us, and we should be inscribed for Ksira Chsima Tova L'Shana Tova Masukah.